Morning, everybody, and welcome to the session today. Thank you so much for joining our call. It's looking through the list of registrations. It's great to see a few familiar names and also quite a few people that are new to me. To all of you, welcome. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tim Edmonds. I work for Pictet Asset Management in the UK. And for the past few months, I've been the co-chair of the Diversity Project's Neurodiversity workstream. If you're not familiar with that, the objective of our work stream is simply to help our member firms improve their neuro-inclusion, and in doing so, to allow neurodivergent talent to thrive in our industry. As part of this, for the second year running now, we issued a survey during the summer asking neurodivergent people to share their experiences of working and building a career in our industry. We were all absolutely delighted with the response we had, as we had almost 300 people returning it, which, while still a relatively small sample, is more than double that of our first survey. It's our hope that, with your help, we'll be able to continue this growth over the coming years. As an extra step to help us increase our reach, as you may have seen in the media recently, we have formally partnered with GAIN, the Group for Autism, Insurance, Investment and Neurodiversity. GAIN's mission to spark an industry-owned and industry-led radical improvement in the employment prospects of neurodivergent people in insurance, investment and related areas of financial services is so closely aligned to our own that the partnership just seemed natural. The good news is today you're not here to listen to me, as I'd be the first to hold my hand up and admit to being at best an enthusiastic amateur in the field of neurodiversity. In fact, I only started talking about my own dyslexia publicly and at work over the past couple of years, a trend that, as our survey shows, is incredibly common, and we're hoping to sort of raise awareness of that. To discuss this and the other findings from our survey, I'm delighted to be joined by two real professionals in the field. Firstly, Dr. Ian Eyston. As well as being one of the fantastic members of our neurodiversity workstream, Ian completed a research doctorate at Cranfield University in 2022, focused on employment for autistic colleagues, and now works with the Autism Centre of Excellence, who also contributed to our survey this year. Ian will be in conversation with Vic Mazonas. As well as being autistic themselves after a late diagnosis at the age of 30, Vic is the general manager of our partner firm GAIN, where they regularly speak publicly and support GAIN's member firms. And I'm delighted that this is our first formal cooperation with GAIN as partners. I'm going to pass you over to Ian and Vic now without too much hesitation. While they are speaking, and hopefully without distracting too much, I will post links in the chat to our survey report, to our workstream's website, and to GAIN's website, so you can have a look at your own time. We only have 30 minutes for this call, so we're going to struggle to answer too many questions today. However, we do want to hear from you, so feel free to post the questions in the chat and we'll get back to you in writing. Otherwise, you can find our contact details on the website or on LinkedIn. With that, Ian, perhaps to get us started, you give us a brief introduction to the survey findings and 2 or 3 of the points you found most interesting from the results.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to speak with you and Vic this morning, and good morning to everybody else. It's great to have so many of you join us. So yeah, I'm going to kick off by talking a little bit about our survey and then some of the findings, and then hand over to Vic, who's actually got some information from another survey, which we can sort of compare and contrast the 2 sets of findings. So just as a building on what Tim said, obviously in recent years, I think the benefits of having a diverse workforce in any organisation have become more and more well understood. And yet one common, but sometimes quite often overlooked form of diversity is neurodiversity. And it's estimated that probably up to around 15% of the population in the UK has some form of neurodivergence, even if they are not formally diagnosed, and certainly even if they're not disclosed to their employer. And therefore, as Tim said, this is the second year that the Diversity Project's Neurodiversity Workstream has run this survey. And it really revealed quite a lot of insight from our neurodivergent colleagues in the investment industry, who really believe that their neurodivergence actually provides them with a variety of skills that are useful in their career, and therefore obviously useful for their employer, including, I mean, there's a whole host, and you have to be careful not to stereotype, but many of the things that the respondents themselves talked about with their ability to think outside the box, sometimes to have hyper focus on a particular project. Interestingly, and sometimes kind of contrary to some stereotypes, actually increased empathy, and certainly an attention to detail and an ability to notice patterns and connections. Now, all of these things are obviously hugely beneficial in certain circumstances. But as I said, what was really interesting was that just over half of our respondents said that they'd actually disclosed their neurodivergence to their employers. So if you're sat there as an employer, perhaps a senior manager or someone from HR, someone who perhaps deals with this on a day-to-day basis, the first thing that the survey really reminds us of, because this supports other surveys, is that many people that work for you will have some form of neurodivergence which you do not know about. So it is not sufficient just to say, well, if someone responds and tells us about it, we'll be very understanding, because you need to go further than that. You need to think, why are they not disclosed? Part of the reason is that people genuinely fear that their career opportunities will be limited, or that they might just get a negative response from colleagues. And that's partly supported from their past experiences, which have not always been positive in many cases. But also, half of the respondents told us that when they'd asked for reasonable adjustments in their firm, it hadn't been granted. Now, clearly the concept of reasonable adjustments means that sometimes there might be a difference of opinion as to what counts as reasonable and whether it's affordable and whether it's realistic. But when it's half of the responses have been declined, it does seem that we still have a situation where people are not being as open-minded, as creative with their solutions as they could be. So I think that's, again, something for employers to really think about. If you want to be truly inclusive, then if somebody does tell you that they need something to help them do better at work, then why wouldn't you try and be more supportive? So we're trying to encourage firms to increase training and support for line managers who are critically on the front line of the support for neurodivergent individuals. And by having consulted with people and now having this feedback, we're also making it a big part of our aim to promote as widely as we can the findings. So as well as doing today's webinar, we're hoping to put something in Investment Week journal very soon. And you can, as Tim said, you can actually access the full set of results from our website. So there is a lot of things that people can do to understand more. And we have some specific things that we would like to encourage firms to do, but I'll perhaps come back to those in a moment, because I'd like to give Vic an opportunity to talk a little bit about, as I said, another survey that's been undertaken, which kind of builds on some of the things that we've learned, and then we can come back to perhaps some recommendations that we propose. So Vic, would you like to take it over?
Very happy to do so, thank you. Yeah, it's actually, I'm really excited to be here, because I do think that the work Diversity Project is doing is incredibly important, and the opportunities for us to work together on this, work together on sharing data, finding solutions, making recommendations. There's so much that we can be doing together, and I'm very excited that we're starting this. On that, Gain ourselves, we also do an annual member survey for our individual members. Ours happens towards the end of the year. So we have our 2022 member survey results. We are currently in the middle of receiving our 2023 member results. So within about a month from now, we should have some very interesting data to compare to your most recent ones. But what I can do is talk about a little bit of what we saw in last year's ones, because our report did have some quite similar trends to yours. Some of the things we noted is that although more of our neurodivergent respondents did say they were open with their employer, when we asked them, we broke that down by specific individuals within their company. So I think most people felt confident being open towards their line managers, and a few others were open towards co-workers, but people were much less confident at the idea of disclosing something elsewhere in the company. The two questions we asked, one of them was, are you open in the workplace, and if so, with whom? And then another question we asked is, if you were diagnosed with a new neurodivergence tomorrow, how confident would you then be disclosing that to people? And I believe around 30% said they would be uncomfortable disclosing to their employee working group. I'd say about 40% said they'd be uncomfortable disclosing to their line manager. And it continues along that line. So there is that feeling that while people were willing to be open, or at least had decided to be open at some point, there is that fear around doing it anew and doing it afresh. We did note as well that, like yourselves, considering that similarly to yourselves, around 50% of our members considered their neurodivergence to be a disability, only 41% had ever requested an adjustment in the workplace. And while most of ours fortunately said that they had had theirs fully or partially met, many of them said that there were multiple aspects of the process that were unsatisfactory. 33% had issues with line managers. 50% said that there were issues with the way HR handled things. And the biggest barriers they noted, I believe the by far largest issue was a lack of knowledge among the decision makers involved about neurodivergence. And the second point was a lack of proactivity in finding knowledge and in going to seek out these things. So a very solid trend we saw amongst our member responses is that while they were very willing to be frankly quite brave and step forward and try and do a lot of the legwork in getting access to what they needed, what they were finding on the other end is that they were having to handhold quite a lot, and that mistakes were being made largely out of a lack of knowledge and not necessarily understanding the situation. Very clearly more education is needed, more awareness is needed. We need to keep having these conversations. I know that in the diversity project you saw so many, specific needs were made quite clear. I really liked the question that your survey asked about what was causing the anxiety among people who might not disclose. That's something we've actually taken up for our survey this year as well, and we're quite looking forward to seeing if we get similar results there. I will say, although it's very early days, some early trends we've also seen in our 2023 survey is that actually 50% so far of respondents have said that they would feel unsafe or very unsafe complaining in the workplace about harassment or bullying or raising a complaint there. About 79% so far state that they have experienced or witnessed that in the workplace. And we saw similarly high numbers in last year's responses as well. So it seems perhaps that one of the barriers to people disclosing in the workplace could just be that fear of being treated differently, that fear of how you're going to be seen. And especially if people have previously experienced things like that, whether they knew they were neurodivergent at the time, or if, like many of us, found out later in life, that's going to act as a barrier, and that's going to influence the kinds of fears you're going to have around disclosure, which, again, like you say, is going to make it even harder for employers to actually know how to help their employees, because how can you help them if they don't feel safe telling you they need it in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important point, and it's quite interesting. It's, as you said, it's great that we're working together and sharing the insights that we're both getting. And there's a couple of things in particular that you said there that really struck me. One is, coming from a HR background, I always feel quite kind of doubly anxious that I realize in the past, before I was aware as much as I am now about neurodivergence, some of the things that I kind of allowed to happen, I now wish that I'd known more about it. So I definitely, spend quite a bit of my time, trying to encourage now HR departments to be more understanding. But your point about kind of like getting a bad reaction at work, it was interesting. In my doctoral research, one of the things that I found was that the line managers of neurodivergent individuals were additionally stressed, significantly stressed, because they wanted to be as supportive as possible when someone presented a neurodivergence to them, but often felt that their employer hadn't given them the information, the training, and the tools to be able to adequately respond. And it's quite interesting, because when we look at the things that came out of our survey in terms of almost the calls to action, the things that we and particularly the respondents think is really important, first out of the 5 big topics was about increased awareness and education of neurodiversity, because if employers can increase that awareness and make neurodiversity more talked about and understood in the workplace, it's probably more likely to encourage individuals to feel comfortable and get over what you talked about in terms of that nervousness. So that's why that's kind of number one for us. And then kind of building on that, once the people have kind of been open and disclosed, as I said a bit earlier, making sure that as an organization, you've got adequate support mechanisms to back people up. It's one thing to sort of say in glossy websites and in kind of marketing material, yes, we want to be inclusive. But if people ask for, quiet spaces in an open plan office, or they want specialist software to perhaps to help with their dyslexia, it's no good saying yes in theory, but then finance saying we haven't got the budget to do that and we can't help you. There's got to be a joined up conversation around the culture of an organization to make sure that the process of requesting and then of actually getting reasonable adjustments is simpler, more effective and less stressful than it perhaps is at the moment. And really that keeping communicating and especially training people is very important. And I would also go further, which kind of links back to the HR point, which is it's really important to cater for neurodivergent job applicants. It's very easy or easier to think, oh, well, I've got to deal with the people that were already in my organization. But our survey revealed that actually over half of the people that talked to us said that had real difficulty finding employment at different parts of their career, because so many job processes are designed by neurotypical people with a very neurotypical mindset. And whether that be the way that job descriptions are laid out, or the application process, assuming a level of neurotypicality that just doesn't apply to some people, or the interview process just not being sympathetic enough, can all cause challenges, so that firms are losing the opportunity to recruit great people. And it kind of finally, the thing that I think kind of wraps up our results and kind of brings us back to where you are again, which is that we are encouraging people to encourage role models and allies to speak out. As more of us start to talk about our own neurodivergence and people have got the confidence to do that, and people see others talking about it, it becomes easier for others, perhaps more junior or younger people or newer people into the workforce, to be able to share their own circumstances. And I think that fits very closely, both with what Diversity Project is doing, what I'm also finding in my work with the Autism Centre of Excellence, where we're going around the country speaking to employers about recruiting autistic people. And I think the things that mean as much to you as well. So I think it is going to be a great partnership, Beck.
I think so. And just some of the things you mentioned there really resonated with me. One of the early points you mentioned about line managers wanting to create inclusive teams and wanting to support their team members, but feeling like there's a lack of knowledge. We've seen a very similar thing as well. In addition to our individual member survey, one of the services we offer our members, our corporate members, is a benchmarking process for their company. Now, we're not yet ready to publish the public version of the benchmark. Until we have enough companies have gone through it, we can keep it as anonymous as possible. But some early trends we've seen, very common across the board, is that, again, like you said, line managers who, let's face it, they are quite often the front line of any employee's experience of the company. Most people experience the culture and the mindset and the entire environment of their employer through their line manager more than anyone else, if possibly HR being the other people that have the biggest influence, because those are the people who set the tone. Those are the ones who decide what your workday is going to look like, and they are really the linchpin in these things. And we've seen a big trend so far in a lack of confidence around line managers. And also a little bit of Dunning-Kruger effect, where those who are most confident were unfortunately the least knowledgeable, which doesn't help either. So I think one of the big barriers we've seen is that quite often there's an anxiety around getting it wrong, and there's an anxiety around, I want to help, but I feel like I know so little that I don't even know where to start. And that closes people off from being able to start making the difference, because they're so scared of making mistakes they don't want to try. When actually empowering line managers and HR and people across different team levels to actually create this environment is a lot less complicated than it feels when you start thinking about things in the right way and getting the right kind of mindset. Another thing you mentioned about, people starting to have these conversations and creating the safe place. That's one of the reasons why I think the role of leadership is so vital.
Mhm.
I think we are finding now, like I said, many people are finding later in life that they're neurodivergent. Anecdotally, so many of our members are finding in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond, when a child or grandchild is going through diagnosis and they're seeing themselves reflected in the process and starting to realize, oh, hang on a minute, there's similarities.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt, because I was going to say that's
Yeah.
exactly my experience. I was 55 before I realised that I was autistic, and it was because two of my children were going through the formal diagnosis process, and I was sat next to them, answering the questions in my head and realising that everything they were saying was applicable to myself, and it kind of it dropped into place. That things through my career that had perhaps been problematic, I was very lucky. I managed to navigate the workplace and be relatively successful. It didn't derail me too often, but I can think of a few things which did. But I know other younger people who said they've been derailed a lot in their career because they didn't realise that they were neurodivergent. So as you say, it's having that level of awareness is really important. And line managers want to be helpful, but if they don't know, if they're not being trained, that can be a real problem. So us sharing information is really valuable.
Absolutely. It's one thing I'm advocating hard for is people who are in any level of industry who have some kind of leadership role, who are yourselves finding that you're neurodivergent or that you've got neurodivergent family members. People in leadership position choosing to be open about that and be vulnerable about that is incredibly impactful, because it sets the tone for the entire company. If someone who has a level of respect and authority stands up and says, I'm autistic, I've had these experiences, these are the challenges I have in the workplace, and this is how I accommodate them, that tells everyone else at every level that's an okay conversation to have in the workplace. That's a normal conversation to have in the workplace. And it becomes a much less intimidating thing. What you're doing then is you are taking the burden off of the more junior members of the company to be the ones to be the first to stand up. And I think that's so impactful and so important, just to make that journey that much easier for people. And leadership can even then set examples for how to accommodate by saying what they need. A really common one I often say is in our own coffee chats we do for our individual members, a very early thing we do in the introductions is say to everyone, this is an informal coffee chat, and it's for neurodivergent people. So if anyone wants to be camera off, they are very welcome to be camera off. If anyone doesn't feel verbal, you can interact via the chat, or you can just sit and listen if you prefer, and making the level of participation entirely based on how people are feeling on the day, just to communicate that that's okay and that's normal. And sometimes members of the GAIN team during those will be camera off and using the text as an example of that. And that's some of the ways.
That's a really good example. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about just there quickly, I'm conscious incredibly we said we would probably run out of time, is that I know a number of our member firms have also used the mechanism of staff networks, affinity groups. And sometimes there might be an existing one, sometimes it's connected through maybe the disability group, or sometimes they just create a different one for all neurodivergent people. But that can be quite a welcoming process too, because some people, particularly if they've not disclosed even yet, don't necessarily want to even attend an event that's open to everyone, where they have to disclose. But if there's one which in effect is behind closed doors, it perhaps allows them to go a little bit down that journey, that first step of seeing that there are others in their business that that are equally prepared to talk about it, and then they might feel more comfortable later. So again, if you're in an employer that has staff networks or affinity groups, and there isn't one that's obviously labelled as being neurodivergent friendly, you might think about how you can do something in that arena too.
I agree entirely. I think, like you say, setting up those community support areas, because again, it comes down to the matter of psychological safety and how you communicate to people that it's a safe space, because it's the big paradox of data is that you want information about who your neurodivergent employees are so that you know what their needs are, but you can't ask people to disclose until they feel safe doing so. So finding those ways, like you say, to create that feeling of it's okay to talk about this here is really important. And ERGs and EWGs are a perfect way of doing that, because then the neurodivergent employees in the company can decide for themselves collectively how they want to be having those conversations, what things are like for them in the company. They can look at their own unique circumstances and share with each other. And it makes a huge just difference in terms of possibilities for people once you know you can have those conversations.
Absolutely.
Neurodivergent moment, I had a thought that came into my head from something you were saying, and it's immediately left my head. I'm sure it will come back in about 10 minutes.
Well, while you're thinking about it, I just wanted to pick up. We've had a question in the Q&A from Simone. We haven't got time to do it justice. It's about reasonable adjustments, but the gist of the question is, what reasonable adjustments can you ask for? The answer is actually there's a huge range of things that are plausible, and there is a lot of materials out there. So subsequently, we can send you something with some links. The ADHD Society has some good information. There's now a lot of groups on LinkedIn that are for ADHD colleagues that are providing a lot of insight into what others have asked for. So we'll make sure we follow you up and give you some of the contacts so that you can get a good answer for that one, Simon.
Definitely, yeah. And I think with ADHD as well, it's a very complex and nuanced and varied neurodivergence. So I think the kinds of adjustments that work for each person can be very unique. But I've seen everything from people who've asked their line managers to give them staggered deadlines for pieces of work, if that's something they find helpful, to letting them have meeting agendas in advance, in fact, giving the whole team the meeting agenda in advance so they have time to mentally prepare, up to and including even just simple things. I know some co-workers who have movement breaks during the day where they just they'll be thinking about work and walking around the office rather than sitting at their desk, so that they can actually keep that energy and keep that focus. And there's a huge range of things, but definitely there's too much to cover in one quick Q&A.
But actually, what you've just said then actually is probably a really great way, an important point to kind of start wrapping up on, because the diversity within neurodiversity is actually something that I've just learned so much about. And I think that understanding that everybody is different within neurodiversity, autistic people, even two autistic people will be different and have different requirements. Different people with ADHD have different requirements. Dyslexia presents in different ways. So that's why that point about education and understanding and creating a culture within firms where people can have a conversation and say, well, what do you need? As opposed to, well, let's just impose a process or a system on you. That's, if people are only going to remember one thing from this, actually the diversity of neurodiversity is really critical and can inform the way you think about things in a really important way. So that's a really important point you made.
Oh, thank you. And it leads on to something I always say as well, which is that I think one of the most impactful things you can do in terms of changing the mindset and changing culture is stop thinking about this is how we work and how do I get people to work the way I want them to get out the outputs I need, and instead think, regardless of anyone's disclosure of neurodivergence, or even if they're not neurodivergent themselves, how does everyone in my team work best? What makes them the best version of themselves? What support helps them? And how can I create that environment where every member of my team, however different they are, can bring their best selves, regardless of reason?
That's a great way of doing it. And I'm conscious Tim's appeared.
I think that's a great message to end on.
I've put my my email address in there. I got it wrong the first time, but if people want to pick up on any particular points, they can message me, or if they put the questions in the questions, then we will definitely follow up later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely to talk with you both.
Yeah, Vic, Ian, thank you so much for taking your time today, and thank you to all of you for joining us and taking your time to listen to Vic and Ian speak. Please, if you have any questions, do look at our website, do look at Gain's website. You can contact us on LinkedIn or via the email address you'll find there. It'd be great to hear from you. There will be a recording of the webinar made available on our website, probably over the course of the next week or so. Please, again, share it as much as you like if you think anybody would find it useful. Again, we hope you found this useful, and please do reach out if you'd like to get involved. like to hear more from us, it'd be great to hear from you. Great. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic day. Vic, Ian, thank you again.